All right, I'll record my PC. It's fine. I think we'll be okay. All right. So today's verse of the day is going to be coming from the book of Colossians. This is a letter that Paul wrote, um, and it's going to be really kind of two verses because it just kind of goes together very well. It's going to be found in the book of Colossians, chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. It says, "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive." Um, I think this is a good verse today. I think we've talked about this maybe a little bit before, but maybe it's just a good reminder, right? Like we are, first off, just breaking this down. We are those of us that have been saved, right? Those of us that have a relationship with God. We are God's chosen children. We have been called out. We have been saved by His marvelous grace. We have been born again, and it is absolutely important for us, right, that we remember that God has called us to a higher purpose, a higher standard, right? And he says, "So put then on as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved." This is what he wants us to do: put on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to always remember to do those things, right? It's not always easy for us to be compassionate to people, especially those who are less fortunate. It's easier for us to go, "Oh man, it sucks. Sorry to hear about their circumstances." But um, it's harder for most of us to show empathy with individuals going through those situations and be compassionate towards them, or kindness and trying to actually help them. Humility, right? We're a very prideful group of people. Like as man, like in our nature is we're very proud people because we want to brag. We want to boast on the things that we do, right? We want to be proud, take pride, and be proud in the work and the things that we've accomplished. And so it's not always easy for us to be humble. The same way with meekness, right? And patience. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a very patient person. Like patience is just not one of my virtues. Um, we all, I think a lot of us probably suffer the same way. Like with instant gratification, it's hard for us to wait on something. It's hard for us to be patient for something to happen, or when things don't go our way, or when maybe when your kids or other people are upsetting you, it's hard to have patience with that person and not be quick to be angry, right? And I think that's probably one of my biggest struggles. I think is patience. I don't have patience. I mean, I have patience, but I just don't have the greatest patience. We put it that way. And so it says this, right? Like, as God's chosen people, right? We've been called to a higher standard. These are the things that it tells us to do: to have compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience. These are like the fruits of the Spirit, right? Bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. We talked about this, I think, not too long ago about people holding grudges as Christians, right? Like, what kind of example does that set to the rest of the world that we expect a holy and righteous God to forgive us if we can't forgive other people for the things that they've done? We should be willing to be compassionate, to be humble, to be patient, and to bear with one another and forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven us, we must also forgive. It doesn't make sense, and I tell people all the time, like, I get well, people have hurts and hangups, and you're broken, and people have done you wrong. Trust me, if there's anyone that understands that, I understand that. When it is hard to forgive somebody who has wronged you. It really is. But I can tell you now firsthand that God can help you to overcome those things and to have forgiveness and to have peace. Because at the end of the day, right? This is the truest statement you'll probably ever hear. At the end of the day, forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for you. You will always have some sort of anger and hatred or resentment built up in your heart until you learn to forgive. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't affect the other person. It doesn't affect their day to day lives, whether you are showing them forgiveness. It doesn't affect them in their day to day lives if you have this anger and frustration or hatred built up against them. It doesn't affect them. They don't care, right? So forgiveness isn't for them. It's so that you can move forward with your life and be an example of the same forgiveness that was shown to you on the cross of Calvary when Jesus died for us. And so the only way you're ever going to be able to be better in life, the only way you're ever going to be able to be that example that Christ has called us out to be, is to truly learn to forgive. So this morning, maybe
Amen.
you've got that anger and hatred built in your heart. Maybe you've got some resentment. Maybe you're having trouble with being compassionate or patient or being humble, right? Maybe you got some issues. Some people have wronged you and have done things wrong to you or to hurt you, and you found it hard to be able to forgive them in your heart, right? Ask God to open your heart this morning to show compassion. Ask God to open your heart this morning to be humble and to forgive them the same way that Christ forgave us. Because I will tell you now, I know that it's possible. I held a lot of anger and resentment against my foster family that I had for years against a foster family that used to abuse me when I was a kid, man. Long time, and I had so much anger and hatred was built up against those people. You don't even know. I mean, if I could just go in depth and the extent to tell you of how much it hurt me, like it affected me for a long time in my life. But do you think that my anger and hatred and resentment affected their day to day life? No. They probably don't even. They probably didn't even remember me. Honestly, I was just but a little blip in their lives, probably to them. But it affected me so much, the fact that it caused me to. I mean, it was one of many things that led me to want to be, into the path of becoming an alcoholic. It was my coping mechanism to deal with the things that I went through as a child, right? And I had to understand that my my hatred, my resentment, my anger, my frustration, my unforgiveness, right? It wasn't affecting them, it was affecting me. And so I remember when I was working the steps of recovery, um, the last time I still hadn't done step 9 was always the biggest hard part for me was step 9, right? And that was forgiving other people, right? Who have wronged you. It was the hardest thing for me. It really was. Um, I couldn't do it. I struggled so bad with step 9. But the last time I went through the steps, a little over 3 years ago, I did step 9. Matter of fact, I actually wrote out a whole letter and I sent it to him on Facebook, because I found him on Facebook. I found the dad, the guy who my foster parent at that time, and I don't even know, to be honest with you, I don't even know if he read it. I never went back to check if he read the message or not. I I know I never got a reply, but I had to write that letter and send it to him because it was my way of healing and moving forward in my life, was to let him know that no matter what he did and whether he was sorry or apologetic or not, that I forgave him. That was something I had to do. And maybe this morning you have something like that that's holding you back too. Maybe this morning you have something that's holding you back in your life that you have a lot of anger and resentment built up against, right? And maybe you need to take that step this morning and do the same thing. But you'll never move forward in life. You'll never truly find joy until you're able to forgive people. 100%. The most miserable people in this life, I promise you, the most miserable. I'm not saying sad, I'm saying miserable. The most miserable people in this life are people that don't have forgiveness in their hearts. I 100% believe that. So, I would tell you my experience And I haven't always been perfect, right? I've made mistakes. I've walked away from God. But I was, the first time I ever believed that God really spoke to me, I was 15 years old. And this is after I had got out of the foster care system, and I had got to go back and live with my mom. I had quit believing in God at that point, and I remember going to church service, and that was when I truly remember like God convicting me and showing me that I was lost and that I had a need for Him. Um, and I gave my life to Christ that day. I surrendered my heart, and I'll never forget the peace and the love that I felt. I can still tell you, man, I can tell you so much about what happened that day. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was March 14th, 2004. Now, mind you, I haven't always lived a good life. I struggled a lot with alcohol because I still had a lot of underlying things that I dealt with as a kid that was my coping mechanism. I didn't have the best, I didn't have a father in my life who taught me how to cope with things. I lost my grandfather right after I got saved, so I didn't have a good spiritual example or a guide in my life that could point me in the right direction. My mom was a keister mother. My mom went to church on Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. So, like, it wasn't like I had a good, strong Christian mother that took me to church every Sunday or anything like that. And I love my mom, and I'm not talking bad about my mom. Please understand that I'm not. I'm really not. I love my mom to death. I know my mom always tried to point me in the right direction and always pointed me to God. But my mom also wasn't a person that I could really go to a lot for godly sound advice either. And so, um, I struggled a lot with the things that I experienced as a kid. And when I was, when I was, um, oh God, 15 and 16, 16. When I was 16 years old, I'll tell you that's when I believe God had called me into the ministry, and I didn't want to do it. I ran from it for 2 years. I got out in the world, and that's when I started my downward spiral with drugs and alcohol and things like that, and it became just an overwhelming addiction in my life. And so I struggled real bad with that for a while. And I mean, I got back into church and made things right. And I was sober for a long time until I went through some marriage issues with my ex-wife. And I just got into a real bad, deep, dark, depressed spot in my life, and I started drinking again. And that was when I really started to learn like the steps and coping, biblical like steps and coping with my addiction and what the problem was and dealing with underlying issues and stuff like that. So um I've not always been perfect, and I'm not saying that anybody ever will be perfect, but um I've been through a lot in this life, and I've seen a lot. I've done a lot of things that I'm not proud of, but I will tell you now, I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been on both sides of the track. And I will tell you, there's so much more joy. There's so much more peace. There's so much more freedom in having a relationship with God than there is in anything this world has to offer you. I promise you. I promise. And I would be willing to lay down everything that I love and everything that I have if it meant for people to know the same peace and joy and freedom that I have in Christ. Paul probably said it best. Paul said it best, and I can 100% agree with him. He said, I would gladly give up my salvation if it meant that all my brethren, he's talking about Israel, all of Israel would be saved if they could experience what he had. And I will tell you right now, that's how deeply passionate and how I feel about my relationship with God, is that I would gladly give up what I have if it meant that everyone else could experience what I have too. But it didn't work that way. But that's the great thing about it. It's a free gift. It's absolute free gift. Like I said on Sunday, it is a free gift that Jesus Christ is offering to anyone who will come to him and only ask. So I love y'all. Thank you guys all so much for being here this morning. I didn't mean to get into all of that, man. I was just trying to talk about forgiveness and stuff like that this morning. But we want to go to God in prayer.